Hello, everyone, and welcome to Apex Magazine's Snap Judgment. Welcome back if you've been here before, and if you're brand new to this, we're so glad that you decided to drop in and join us. Even if you're watching after the fact, the replay, we're happy you're here. We hope this will be entertaining and educational for all of us. This is how the format works. Our subscribers and patrons to Apex Magazine have submitted the first page, up to 250 words, of their genre short stories and or novels. And as I will be reading our submissions out loud, they are anonymous. Our panel of judges and editors will raise their hand at whatever point they would stop reading in the slush pile. When all three hands are raised or the piece is finished, I will stop reading, and our editors will give feedback in a roundtable style discussion. The judges' critiques are meant to help you hone your craft and answer the age-old question of what a magazine editor is really looking for. We do receive more stories than we can cover in 90 minutes, so your entries have been randomized and will go in the order that fate has set. Apologies if we do not get to your work. Please join me in welcoming our judges for this edition of Snap Judgment. Lesley Conner, Apex Magazine's editor-in-chief, author of the alternate history extreme horror novel The Weight of Chains. Lesley, welcome.
Hi.
We also have Rebecca E. Treasure, managing editor and flash editor of Apex Magazine, and a writer with short fiction in Galaxy's Edge, Air and Nothingness Press, and many more. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hello, hello.
And finally, our very special guest for this edition of Snap Judgment, Brent Lambert. Brent Lambert is a founding member of Faya Literary Magazine, which rocks, and author of novella Unnecessary Chaos, out now from Neon Hemlock. Brent, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We're so excited you could join us. This is going to be great. My name, as some of you already know, is Aly Grauer. I'm your host, narrator, and nosy know-it-all neighbor, I guess. Because I ask a lot of follow-up questions, I feel like, and I'm always interested in digging a little bit deeper into these critiques because I think that there are some really awesome perspectives that get shared here, and I'm really excited to get into these submissions because these are cool. So, are we all ready to begin?
Yep, let's go.
Nice. All right, we're going to start it off with a sci-fi climate fiction short story. The title is Weep When You See Me. Your dry season is nearing its end when I find the stone. I'm walking north along one of your riverbeds, the cracked earth unrelenting underfoot. The Rio Grande de Arecibo once ran all the way to your northern beaches where tourists lounged and the waters mingled, salt and fresh, like lovers' tongues. I imagine it was beautiful. Maybe it still is. Maybe the beach is even prettier now, so far below the poison waves. Maybe your beauty was not destroyed, but merely taken from you, repurposed into silent, benthic gardens where nothing lives, and you have lost so much. A thin, trickling rope of water still runs down the arroyo center. The river is reduced to this, or something like this, every year. Drier now than it's been in a few decades, but no one is too worried. We'll endure. And it was worse a century ago. By tomorrow, the lake should be at a high enough watermark to let a little more drown down the river, to unleash the Rio Grande de Arecibo. Do you enjoy it, I wonder, when the dams open and the rains come and the waters rush across your surface like spidering veins? Out of our mountain towns, down out of the Cordillera, and through the looming seawalls. I imagine you like the sensation, a brush running through hair. It is this rejuvenatory tomorrow that I am picturing when I come across the stone, smooth and dusty in the red earth. No hands went up, off to a strong start. I apologize for my horrible Spanish. Why don't we have Lesley go first?
First, this is beautifully written. It is the details, and the senses that you invoke are wonderful. I really enjoyed that. I wrote down lovers' tongues nice because I was like, I really enjoyed that imagery that you invoked. It's very good. The only thing that I started to have this little like tingle in the back of my brain as we got farther in is we're like 250 words in and I'm not seeing how this is speculative, which is something, I mean, I know authors feel like they get a lot from me in rejection letters is like this isn't speculative enough. So that would be like my one concern is if this is going to be a speculative story, which you're saying it's sci-fi, climate fiction, I kind of feel like I need to see some of that maybe a little sooner if it's not coming soon. Because I will say, like, if I get a page or two, 3 pages into a story and I'm reading in the slush and I can't tell in any way what genre we're in and how this is going to fit with Apex Magazine, then I'm going to probably be like, okay, I can't buy a story that's not speculative. So that would be my one thing that just kind of started at the end of this part where I'm going, well, how is this speculative? Because climate disasters are already happening. So it may just like I feel like that's not something that is strong enough if you're trying to sell it as a speculative piece. But it's beautifully written. The details are wonderful. The imagery and the senses you invoke, it's wonderful.
Absolutely. Becky, what do you got?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Just based on the strength of the writing, I would definitely have kept reading. The consistency of the personification throughout was really, really strong. I love the language choice. And then I feel like we talk a lot in openings about how you need to deliver this like hook, and then you need to deliver on these promises that you're making to your reader. And it circles back around to the stone after wandering and doing a lot of description. It circles back around, and that tells me that this writer's intentionally making these choices. And so that builds trust with me as a reader too. So yeah, I loved this.
Yeah, thank you. Brent.
The language is just gorgeous. Like the whole way through, I was just impressed with the command of language. To Leslie's point about the speculativeness of it, I kind of agree with that. I feel like what is potentially happening here is that there's a personification of the river happening. But if that's the case, I think it needs to be made clearer that this is what this is, that like this character is actually literally communicating with the river. It feels like that's what's happening, but it's not being stated frankly enough. Because I think if it's stated frankly, then you can get away with what you're doing here, because then it becomes speculative.
Well, I mean, it becomes speculative, I guess, if the river's capable of having a conversation. Like,
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
how many poems are there out there, to the woods or
Right.
to the lane or whatever, the winding path or the river? And that doesn't necessarily make it speculative if that thing's not speaking back to them.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, that would be a wonderful way to take it. Like, if the river is literally in a conversation, then yeah, 100%. But yeah, that would be my only little thing with this piece is like, I need you to show me how this is speculative.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's probably the one thing, because the writing itself is really, really beautiful. Like,
It's
yeah,
it's very strong. Yeah.
Absolutely. I thought this was so pretty. I wanted to know where it was going to go next, honestly. Are we ready for our next entry?
Mhm.
All right. We have another sci-fi short story. This is sci-fi horror this time, and the title is Movement. The dead body in the corner writhes. My headlamp's beam penetrates the darkness of the cargo bay, illuminating the bright white of Benji's spacesuit. It doesn't move the way a human does, the way Benji moved only a few days ago. It's as though something is pressing against the suit from the inside. The Space Home's training course did not prepare me for this. I glanced back at the generator nestled between crates by the ladder. I could just leave, lock the cargo bay, and hope I'm able to use the generator to summon help. But the director would want me to investigate. He might require a full report before sending help so they'd know what to expect on this planet. Gathering data so he knows what to expect is why he took me in and trained me. So, I clutch my crowbar and shuffle closer. Though it's only been a few days since I deposited Benji's broken body in the bay, the air reeks of decay. I tug my shirt up over my nose. My light creates a glare on the cracked glass of his helmet, hiding his face. If I'd known the suit wouldn't protect him when we crashed through the atmosphere, that his head would smash into the control panel, I wonder if I would have done anything differently. If when he said I reminded him of his daughter, I would have told him. He was like the father I always wanted. No hands, but a lot of thoughtful faces. Becky.
I guess it feels like this opening is doing a lot of things, and a lot of things are coming at me very quickly, and I'm not sure that they're all being fully supported. Like I'm not grounded really before I'm hit with another thing and then another thing. And I feel like, so I have this question about the dead body, but it's not really immediately clear that that's Benji's spacesuit. So that wasn't immediately. So I had to like kind of rearrange my perception. Like, is it Benji? And so I was pulled out of the story by this question. And then Space Home's training course, that's an interesting sci-fi kind of concept, but it doesn't really go anywhere. It's not supported anywhere. And so I'm left with this kind of open bracket, which you expect at the beginning of stories. You expect to be, be opening brackets. But like I said, with the last one, we want to, it's sometimes helpful to close one of those brackets fairly quickly so that the writer goes, okay, I can trust, or the reader, sorry, goes like, I can trust this writer. I know that they're going to deliver on these. And this one felt like it just kept opening brackets. And so like, I was interested in it, there's a lot of interesting things happening here and the writing is fine, but I would be looking very quickly to be grounded with like some kind of summary of what's actually going on that brings all this together, or it is going to lose me.
Brent, what do you got? Anything?
Yeah, for me, so the writing is enough to keep me going, but I think as I was listening, I was like, okay, change that, fix this. Because it starts off very impersonal and then moves into the personal really quick. And it's like, okay, well, if Benji is the body, why do we say the dead body in the beginning? We should just say Benji's body, because like this is a personal connection, obviously. So that thorough thread should follow through. And for me, it felt like each paragraph was giving like a whole chunk of like world building, and I didn't have enough time to really get into the horror aspect of it. And I almost put up my hand after that last sentence in the first paragraph, because I'm like, well, what's something? Give me like an actual thing. Give me an image. Like, what's happening that is so horrifying that, that this guy is totally afraid of their dead friend's body. And yeah, so for me, like it's what it is. I would have kept reading it, but I definitely would have like had like notes on like what we would need to sprucing up or expand.
For sure, definitely. Lesley?
Yeah, I felt like I never was able to get super connected into the story because, as Becky and Brent mentioned, it's like so many things are coming at us that I never, even though this piece is trying to do a huge chunk of world building in a very short period of time, I'm not sure you give us enough specific touch points for that image to really coalesce. Like, I really felt like I could almost see what was going on, but it wasn't quite sharp enough. And so I think that would be my biggest thing, is like really go in and sharpen those descriptions, make them super specific, make them really add to this piece. Because at the end, especially towards the end, I feel like this main character is just wondering a whole lot. And I'm going, yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm wondering too. So I just really feel like we need to get some things like tightened down, some specifics that we can be like, okay, this is I can see this, or I understand this, so that can be like a touch point to then branch into this wider world. I just never felt like I got a specific that kind of anchored me in place to where we could explore together. I just felt kind of lost. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think somebody mentioned that oftentimes we're asking for more detail and more world building. So it's obviously a case by case basis, right? That like you can add all of this world building and still have us asking questions that we want more answers to right off the bat. So like season to taste, right? There's a time and a place, and you have to kind of find what fits, right?
and I think you kind of have to, for me at least, you kind of have to figure out, okay, what's the typical kind of world building questions, and then what can I do to do something that like catches someone's eye, or give them that one detail that really catches their eye. And I think in this case, it's what's the body doing. Like if you tell me the body's head is like spinning around and twisting and like popping up and down like a lollipop or something, I'm like, oh, that's creepy. It's enough to catch my attention. And then you can give the more generic world building about like, space directors and space training and whatnot, because you've kept my interest enough with that one unusual detail that I'll keep reading. So I think for me at least, that's what I would focus on. Like, what can you do that's going to differentiate this in an interesting way from other like space horror stories?
Well, and the one description that it does give us of the body moving is that it looked like something was pressing against the suit from the inside. I would have liked then for you to give me more of that description. Like, I love the idea that, okay, well, is it someone's hand looking like it's pressing out from the inside? Or like, do we have an elbow? Like, is this like a baby in the womb, like a knee going across the mother's stomach?
Or
like
a chest burster.
Right. Like, give us some more specific details of what that, because the pressing from the inside, that's creepy. Like, if you imagine a spacesuit and there's something that's very creepy, but I need that little bit more specific description to kind of really nail it home on how creepy it is, because it's like you just like gave us that and then moved on to shove more stuff at us.
Yeah, because like if it's like a hand with like claws or something, or it looks like, or even if it looks like a tentacle, it doesn't look like a person. That's creepy.
That's
it's
creepy.
Like, so.
Yeah, I think that sometimes it feels like non-specific details are scarier, but actually the more concrete that you get, the more intense of the mental image that you're putting in the reader's mind. So I think that the more concrete you can be, the stronger that horror element, or really any description element, is going to be.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Interesting. We have another sci-fi short story. I think we were observing prior to this. For those of you who aren't familiar with the stream, I have read the submissions prior to the stream, but none of the judges are reading them prior to us going live. So they're experiencing this in real time. But we're seeing a lot of sci-fi this time around, which is kind of exciting. This is a sci-fi short story called Skin Sight. As soon as the captain left, Ian released the drone he was working on and nudged Una. "What is this?" he signed, and held up a toy from his latest trip to the surface. Una cupped her hand above it, fingers splayed so that when he released the thing, its natural buoyancy carried it up into her palm. It was a plastic horse, the kind she'd had as a child. She stifled a small noise and caressed the sand-blasted figurine, sickly white in the azure glow of the flooded tank room. "Land animal," she signed, and gave it a novel name from their fledgling gestural vocabulary, fast forelegs. Ian dragged an arm over his long face, past two enormous eyes, and down the twin row of webbed spines that lined his back like a porcupine mane. "Fast forelegs like me," he signed, and cackled in crimson. Una couldn't help herself. She smiled, the skirt of her dive mask tightening against her wet cheeks. "Yes, like you." But then she saw the flicker of milky pink in his skin just before it settled back into its familiar indigo. Regret. Had he picked up on something? Could he finally read her face? Had he just realized the moisture collecting in her mask was coming from tears and not a leak? Ian went back to tinkering with the squid drone that was swimming in circles, thanks to the missing fin Una had ripped from its torso a few hours earlier. Apparently not. Becky?
This is interesting, and it kept my interest, but I was tempted, like I would never raise my hand after the first line because I want to give them more time than that. But there was 3 characters in that first sentence, and we never hear from the captain again. So I'm not sure that it's necessary to do that right away. So at the first, I was like, well, that's a lot to open up with that captain. But then a character signing, that's interesting. That's not something that we see very often. So I was, But then we find out that we're at Una's perspective instead of Ian's, and I was like, oh, because usually if you open with a character, that typically is where your POV is going to rest, and so you start to settle into that. And then I had to readjust and like shift heads and figure out where I was going or seeing from. So I feel like some of this is a little bit out of order. Like it says that he cackles in crimson, and I have no context for that. I don't know what it means. I don't know. Like, is this metaphorical? Is this concrete? At the beginning of speculative fiction, we kind of don't know what kind of world we're in ever. So if things are pretty metaphorically, that can be really confusing. But then we find out it's concrete, 2 paragraphs later, but I feel like maybe shifting that because we're still getting to know the world might have been easier for me to understand what was going on. So no, I didn't raise my hand, and there's a lot of really cool ideas happening here. Like I really like what this is setting up, but I feel like some of the information is coming at me a little bit out of order for me to get, again, grounded in this opening to then ride with the character through the rest of the piece.
Yeah, really good point. Lesley?
I felt like this feels like a huge concept outside of what we know in our world, because from what I'm gathering, we're in some sort of water world, like they're underwater. So that is a huge concept to try and deliver within a short story. And I think that this does a pretty decent job. It is giving, like Becky said, it is giving us some concepts that you kind of have that moment of like, is that literal or is that just a figure of speech? But I think it does a pretty decent job of us showing us that it is pretty literal. My one thing that I will say is I'm not sure, like I would start pretty soon after this starting to wonder what the conflict is going to be, because right now all we're getting is basically world setup in this 250 words. You need a lot of world setup when you're having a world that is so completely alien from what we live in. So you need that, but so much world setup and pretty language is only going to take me so far before I start wondering what's the conflict, what is at stake. I feel like we get a tinge of it in Una crying because of the toy. But her being sad isn't enough of a driver for a story. Like there needs to be more than that. So I feel like I would definitely have kept reading from this point. But if we get into page 4, 5, and I'm still like feeling like all we're doing is setting up this world and not really showing me what is at stake and why I should care, I'm going to be like, all right, well, pretty description and world building can only take it so far. So yeah, that would be my one thing, is make sure your story does more in the beginning than just put us in this world. I think you did a pretty decent job, because in 250 words, I feel like I know we're in a water world. If not, I don't know, you can yell at me on social media and be like, clearly that was not what it was. But I mean, that's what I took from it. So I think that did a really good job. I would just make sure that you don't wait too long to introduce what is at stake and why we should care.
It's a good point. Not waiting too long to introduce what's at stake. That's important. Brent?
Yeah, so I am a child of Animorphs. I love weird creatures. So yeah, so this is cool for me, that I was like, oh, this animal not animal, sorry. This sentient being communicates via skin color, like changing of skin colors. That's cool. But I think, and I notice this sometimes with writers, we tend to hold things back when we don't need to hold it back. And I think we're doing it to try to create an air of mystery, when we really, if you just dive right into the thing, you're going to give yourself more room to expand on the narrative. Actually, you can go deeper. So like, as an example, when we see Una Cup, when she released the thing, you don't need to say the thing. You can just say she released the plastic horse, because she already knows what it is. So she doesn't need to say the thing and then explain what the thing is. She can just say release the plastic horse, which was something from her childhood. And there you saved yourself, you shaved down, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 words. But in short stories, those 10 or 15 words are everything. So that would be my suggestion. Just say it straight out. If she's sad, specify why she's sad. Is she sad because she's stuck on this world? Is it because she wants something that she can't have on this world? Like, just saying sad isn't enough, but if you specify what is the driver behind that emotion, then you give us something that she wants or something she can't get, and then that becomes interesting. So my suggestion with this is just any areas where you're being vague, just don't be vague. Just say it straight up, and you're going to give yourself room to. You're actually going to give yourself a lot more room to explain things that you probably want to.
That's a great reminder, Brent. I definitely think that I'm guilty of that, of like holding details back early on to create some kind of build, but that's not always necessary. So that's a good reminder for all of us. All right. We have another science fiction piece. This is a novella, so a slightly longer piece, which sometimes results in slightly different critique. So it'll be interesting to see what we've got. Remittance Men and Other Acts of Erosion. That Cordelia Winquist had never intended to kill anyone was hardly the point. That, on the other hand, her ship was leaving in less than 6 minutes, that very much was. Gathering herself and her bags best she could, Cordelia speared her way toward the congested gangway, bulky canvas skirts strangling about her legs, a local fashion she found as inconvenient as it was inescapable. Rather much, she darted around a precariously perched column of steel oxygen cylinders, like her family. That Ruby had lied was hardly news. And though Grace couldn't be further from her name, had she been a wing-clipped guinea hen lost in her own coop, Cordelia had been surprised that her youngest sister agreed at all. Marooned. Just the word made Cordelia angry. Marooned. As if she were some sort of common celestial corsair to be dumped on the first uninhabited hunk of rock floating out in space. A plan as dishearteningly unoriginal as it was ineffectual. Just the sort of thing Ruby would like. Which was the worst part of it all? The banality of it. The unoriginality. If one was going to be rid of an unwanted sister in order to steal her share of inheritance, one really ought to do it properly. Get inspired, take pride in your ideas, murderous though they might be, not simply hop on whatever dull-witted plan your dull-witted sister came up with first. This wouldn't be the first time Cordelia had had to survive a coup attempt. She was 53 after all. So we did have Lesley's hand go up. What do you got for us, Lesley?
I feel, I'll be honest, within the first 2 sentences and having that in there 3 times, I started to kind of be like I liked the way it started. Like, she never intended to kill anyone wasn't the point. That she was going to miss her ship was the point. I enjoyed that, but the repetition, and then I just felt like in this one, the language got in the way. Like, it felt overly clunky. I could tell there were times when you were reading it where you were stumbling, which you rarely do. So like that is something that I noticed, because I'm like, Aly doesn't stumble over stuff. So there is something, it just felt very clunky. It felt like you had words that were overly ambitious in some ways, and then words that were repetitive in other places, like a dull-witted plan from your dull-witted sister. Well, maybe come up with a different phrasing. It felt very extraneously wordy, and I'm going to use a big word in there just to show you. It just, yeah, that was it. That it needed to be tightened, and some of those word choices really need to be looked at. I understand if it's like setting up a world building type of thing, like if you're setting up the voice, but you can do that without doing it to the detriment of how it reads.
Yeah, really good point. wordy is the word I would use as well. I feel like very strong start in a voice here.
Yes.
And this goes, my advice every time we do snap judgment is read your stuff out loud, and then have someone else read it out loud, because the way it feels when you speak out loud feels different versus when you're writing it, and also will feel different to someone else who's reading it. So I feel like as the narrator, just as a sidebar here, as the narrator, I felt like I understood the voice right away, but I still tripped. So there is a way to smooth that out.
I will say at the end, when you revealed that we have an older female protagonist, I cheered. As a woman who is getting older, I want to see more older women in fiction.
No, that was great. Yeah, lots of detail here.
Like
Becky?
At that point, I was like, yay!
Yeah, yes. Becky?
Yeah. Openings are hard, especially for longer pieces, because we want to hook our readers quickly, and editors and agents and other such creatures. But we don't want to give away too much. We can't get the story moving too quickly because we will have a longer story to tell. And so I feel like that's just something that's really hard to do. And giving all of this information in the right order is just a challenge, and especially in longer pieces. But the language here, like Lesley said, would be the main thing that I would focus in on, because I'm not entirely sure who Ruby is. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I assume that they're their sisters, but it's coming at me a little bit, again, with that lack of grounding and a lack of context. And like, she darted around a precariously perched column of steel oxygen. So that's a lot of syllables. And I'm not sure how much of that is actually necessary for me to understand what's going on. And I love alliteration, but I have learned that readers don't, and it's actually distracting. As fun as it is to write a sentence that every word starts with P, that's actually really distracting when you're a reader, because you're going, wow, every word starts with P, instead of getting any meaning out of those words. I really like the voice here, though. I really like this. I like the repetition felt intentional to me, and so that didn't throw me out. But the consistently 3 and 4 syllable words started to feel kind of overwhelming. And that's not an easy way to ease your way into a longer piece, to feel kind of like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a lot of reading work to do. But I'm curious about where this is going, because I like the voice. But I think that, like Lesley said, it could be tightened and maybe lightened just a little bit to make it a little bit easier to drop into the world and just go for the ride.
Yeah, I think for me, the first paragraph is the strongest portion of the whole thing. I could tell that there's a Holmesian kind of voice that's happening here with Cordelia. So for me, I think if you're wanting to establish that tone, everything in that second paragraph needs to be relayed through character interaction. She needs to interact with someone quickly and have these details start being laid out, because if the idea is that the story is going to be in her voice, then let us actually hear her voice, because precariously perched column of blah, blah, blah is a lot. But if you follow it up with her giving some dialogue where she talks like that, then it adds a touch of comedy to it. And then it becomes a little more tolerable if that continues, because then it's an intentional choice and not a distracting choice. So, yeah, my recommendation would be that the first paragraph, I like it a lot. And if you're going to use that to establish like who she is, she needs to interact with someone fairly quickly, whether it's like some person in her way or her going up to a ticket booth or whatever happens in this world. I would have her interact with someone very quickly.
Oh my goodness.
Such a good point. Yeah. Go ahead, Lesley.
I have to say that if she speaks this way, I would love that. Like, I would be all down for a smart older woman who speaks in like very, illiterate, large words, just really in there, but maybe take some of that out of the prose and let her say it, because then it really dials on her character. Yeah, I would love that. But I just felt like in the prose, it just became clunky and it was just a little too much.
Yeah, you trip up on it way too easy, because it's just like it feels like it's being kind of like you're kind of beating the dead horse with it. So just like if that's her character, then let it show through her character and not necessarily the exposition.
Yeah, I love that you said ticket booth, Brent, because in my brain I immediately jumped to like she's giving this monologue to the ticket taker, and
Right.
this poor kid is like, "Ma'am, are you getting on or not?" Like
Right.
and especially if because we're talking about being marooned, we're talking about murder, we're talking about plots and inheritances, especially if she's an older, competent, dangerous woman, that having
Right.
this comedy is very interesting.
Right. Because it
I
seems like
would
none of
love,
this is bothering her. She's just like,
Yeah.
whatever, it's
Right.
murder, it's maroon, it's coos, just move out of my way. I'm getting to my ship. Like,
Give
that would
me,
be cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, awesome, cool. All right, this is another short story. This is a secondary world fantasy called Icefall. We crest the rocky hill and see Alisk Oasis. That's where Kaz is, finishing up his apprenticeship. I guess he's my best friend or something. I'm Tesha. I'm in a caravan of 12 people and 30 camels. My mom's running it, and maybe there's a little nepotism, but it's not like I don't pull my own weight. We're bringing supplies to Kaz and the rest of his cartographers so they don't die while they're waiting for chunks of ice to fall from the sky. Why do they need supplies if there's a whole oasis right there? It turns out when I say Alisk Oasis, what I really mean is the desiccated corpse of Alisk Oasis. Rings of skeletal trees, abandoned buildings made of yellow-brown sandstone. At the center of it all, the empty bowl of dust that was once a lake/crater where a 400-foot hunk of ice crashed into the desert. That ice lasted 100 years, but like all ice falls, it eventually ran out. Even though I can see the oasis, we've got a mile to go, and I'm walking because my camel is loaded with supplies, and nepotism only gets you so far. It'll be half an hour before I see Kaz again. Not that it's a big deal or anything, not like I miss him, but if I did miss him, that would be normal, right? Because we've known each other forever, and I guess he's my best friend or something. I saw Brent's hand. I don't think I saw Becky or Leslie's, but let's hear from Brent.
So I'll be honest with secondary world fantasy, the snarky young voice is a very hard sell for me in general. Just because I feel like it is done a lot where you have like the I don't know, the kid who's like just over the whole world. I think for me at least, I think where the power of this story was actually in the description of the environment. And I wish it had started off with this description of Alex Oasis and then maybe kind of brought this voice out through, I don't know, interaction. Because right now it feels like I'm just like I'm reading a diary and it's not necessarily I don't necessarily feel like I'm really interested in what this character has to say yet. Like I like I very much like the idea of like we gotta take supplies to something that is like desolate and but I don't know why. And if yeah, I don't know. For me, I guess just the what we're given as the core of the story isn't something I'm necessarily like interested in secondary world fantasy because I feel like it has been done a lot. So when you do it, you have to do it very, very well. But yeah.
Lesley.
I did not put my hand up. I very nearly did, but I gave it longer because we all know that secondary world fantasy is not my cup of tea, and I am not like in any way the expert. I wasn't bothered by the voice, but what I can say is when it's going, I'm Kaz, and blah 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 blah. I want to. Who are you telling? Right? Because you're very specifically speaking to the reader, but who does Kaz think the reader like what's the purpose of having this voice? Like do they have a YouTube channel? Like, what is the purpose of them speaking that way? Because that was the whole thing. Like it didn't bother me per se, but I just kept asking myself, like there was this voice in my head that's like, why is the author using this narrative decision? Like, why is Kaz telling the story in the way he's telling? Because we don't have any indication of who he's supposed to be narrating this to. And they are very clearly narrating it for someone because they're speaking directly to them. So that would just be my only thing, is that I want to know why. Maybe it could be that that's a thing that's done in a lot of secondary world fantasies, and I just don't know it because I don't read them that often. But yeah, I think I would really question that choice. Because you may lose readers who are going, why is he speaking directly to me? Or maybe it's a secondary world. I know Becky likes secondary world fantasy, so she can be like, I'm the expert. I'll tell you why they did it that way.
Becky, you're being called out. Are you going to take that?
I know.
I do love secondary world fantasy. And so I like the world building here. That's a really neat idea of, you know, ice falling from the sky, and that's where the water comes from. That's a fun idea. But the world building is only one part of fantasy. And I think that sometimes with fantasy, we expect that to do too much of the heavy lifting. Maybe like this voice, like Brent said, feels kind of familiar. This kind of snarky teenager who's like, oh, I guess he's my best friend. That doesn't bother me. It just does feel familiar. And so what did bother me was that with these familiar kind of like neat world building things, snarky teenager, like I'm not invested in any kind of conflict or like goal. I don't feel like this character wants anything, right? Like, I don't feel like this character is going anywhere on purpose. It's their mom's caravan, so they don't even want to be there. It's not like they kind of want to see this guy, but not really. And so as a reader, I'm like, okay, if they don't care, then what do I care about? Like, what am I invested in here? And what am I hoping happens or hoping doesn't happen? And so it doesn't give me a lot of emotional context to respond to. And then, like I've been saying, to get grounded in this character and to just then like sit, you know, hitch a ride behind their eyeballs, I have to know what those eyeballs are hoping to see in order to like respond emotionally with the character. And without that grounding, I'm left a little bit like untethered. But I do like secondary world, and I would have definitely kept reading here. I like the description, I like the idea, but yeah, I'm not grounded.
That is
Lesley's
a good point, that this story seems to be happening to the character rather than it being their story. And I'll tell you, as an editor, there's nothing worse than getting to the end of a fantastic story and realizing that the main character had no active role in what happened. Like, it just happened around them. There's nothing worse than getting to the end and being like, I loved this story, but there's no reason for this character. You could take the character out and it'd be the same story.
Yeah. I think Lesley thought actually is helping me sharpen my own thought, in that I think the reason the voice is like not interesting to me is because I don't know who it's for. And so it and the details don't seem to know who it's for. So for instance, like if Tesha's talking to a friend back home, well, why does the friend care there's 30 camels? Why does now the friend why would the friend care about nepotism? Now, or if Tesha's talking to some nobleman, well, why does the nobleman care about the best friend aspect? Like, I think that's what is probably what's bothering me with the voices, that I really don't know like who it's for, and because I don't know who it's for, it feels like the details are all incongruent. Like they don't seem to match up to whoever this intended audience is.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And back to what we were saying about it feels familiar, the kind of style of the voice, but we're not getting enough specifics to know why. Making that choice between having the familiar type of narration, but what makes it different? What's different about the situation, for sure. On to our next one. We have this is interesting. I'll be real. Weird fiction, flash fiction. So I'm not sure, because flash fiction, I think, varies by definition depending on the magazine, right? As far as like length, some flash places have up to 1,000 words, some are 500 or less. So that's always an interesting puzzle to me. But let's get into it. We'll see. The title here is The B-52s Sing Red Lobster Before I Die. Fortune tellers are frauds. I know that. But Linda insisted, and here I am. She told me she began a couple's bucket list thing when we'd been dating a couple weeks. Well, she calls it dating. I call it guaranteed sex every weekend. Madame Serena made a big show of waving her hand over a crystal ball filled with a mist that I figured was pumped from a machine under the table. It looked impressive, though. I could almost see images through the mist. I went along with this because it was easier than arguing with Linda that the whole fortune-telling thing was a crock of shit. So, when Madame Serena told Linda that she'd be getting a ring soon, it was the first time I ever wanted to clock a woman. Instead, I just glared at her. She had the nerve to wink at me when Linda squealed and hugged me. Okay, Dennis, your turn. I did not want this lady to tell me that I would be getting married or becoming a father soon. No, let's just get something to eat. It's on our bucket list, Linda said in a sing-song voice. I smiled with clenched teeth. Regular sex wasn't worth all this bullshit. Everybody made a face just now. Everyone made a face just now. We all saw that, right? Brent?
Oh, yeah. I feel like I need to jump in here as the guy.
Okay.
Okay. So, okay. So the thing is that if you are going to write a character that is this much of a jerk, you have to make them pay for it. Like, and they this character did not get any kind of comeuppance for being this much of a jerk. And I think for me, that's why I made that face at the end. I'm like, it didn't come together. Like it didn't come together in the way that it needed to. So this guy's, I mean, every point that this guy could be a jerk, he's just being a jerk. Like, oh, I'm dating her just for sex. Oh, I think what she's interested in is bullshit. Oh, how dare she say I have to commit to this woman? Oh, don't set me up for kids. It's like every note that you could have this guy be a jerk, you did it. Which, if you're going to do that, you have to make them reckon with it. They have to reckon with it in some kind of way. And yeah, and also too, I didn't see anything speculative with this one at all. It just kind of felt like I don't know, kind of felt like a He-Man woman complaint, and it was just like I don't know. I think the biggest thing is you gotta make this character pay for their behavior, and you gotta make it speculative. But I love the title though.
Lesley?
I also love the title. Like, that's the first thing I wrote down is I love the title. And I have to say, the author of this piece wins a prize. I have never hated two people so intensely, so quickly. Because Dennis is awful. Like, he is awful. We all know that. Linda's not better. Like that, like, it's on our bucket list. I'm like, ugh. Blech. So, like, I don't know how much more to the story there is, but man, some weird, awful shit better happen to Dennis and Linda. Like, that's what I want. I kind of hope I see this in the Apex Slush because I want horrible things to happen to Dennis and Linda, and I will feel cheated if it does not. So yeah, props for the fact that you made me feel such intense rage towards an imaginary couple so quickly. Because that's impressive. That's super impressive. As far as the writing goes, I thought the writing was really solid. We aren't getting the weird yet. Like, it's not coming yet. And you did say it's flash fiction, so it better be hitting super fast and be super weird. Because if you're telling me it's weird fiction, I want it to be like really weird. But yeah, it's solid. Just there better be a reckoning for these two horrible people. And I kind of hope I get to read to find out what happens to them. I don't know if it'll be a right fit for Apex, but I want to know what happens to them. It's awful to dislike imaginary people so much. So quickly.
I want you to suffer.
Becky?
I love the title, and I read a lot of Flash for the contest, and I'm always rooting for like the crazy, wacky titles because I'm like, come on, deliver on that title because I love that like really bold titles like that. Now, obviously, when we're reading in Slush, most of the time we don't know what genre the author is claiming for the piece. But this doesn't feel like weird fiction to me. The voice feels very kind of commonplace. And so it's okay if it goes weird later, but in Flash, you have 4.5 pages. You know, if it's a 1,500 word Flash cutoff, then you've got what, like 6 or 7. And so fairly quickly, I want to start seeing something happen in Flash. And he's just being a jerk. And I don't know if we need the whole page to establish that we don't like this guy before, you know, something needs to start happening. And if it is weird fiction, like if I was reading for like a weird fiction, like Flash theme or something, I would be really skeptical about the voice here. Because it doesn't feel weird to me. And again, like I'm grounded, but I'm not sure what the conflict is other than I really dislike Dennis. And that could be the conflict. The conflict can be in the reader. But like Brent was saying, like, I want him to not only suffer, but get some sort of like external critique for his behaviors. So that my emotional roller coaster can come to a smooth ending. Right.
Am I the only one who didn't also like Linda?
I didn't like Linda.
Once you said it, I was like, oh yeah,
okay, that would be annoying. It didn't bother me at the time.
Like, yeah. At first I was all like, oh, Linda, you could do better. But then when she was like, it's on our bucket list, I'm like, no.
Could you sing song voice? Yeah.
Yeah, like there's definitely like stage 10 clinger happening there with that song. But I don't know. Now that you said it, I'm like, yeah, she's probably not great either.
Yeah.
But
maybe Dennis and Linda deserve each other. Did we think
maybe that's where it's gonna go? Even that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I also agree. I think Flash is so tricky, and Lesley and Becky have said many times, and advice that I've heard elsewhere is that when you're doing Flash, the title should do some of the heavy lifting for you, both to entice the reader and also to like sell whatever it is this piece is going to be about, right? This title slaps. I have one complaint, and I'm looking at the camera for this one. The title of the song is Rock Lobster. So I'm curious. I want to know, is the weird part that it's actually Red Lobster in this universe? Or do they go to a Red Lobster and the B-52s are there? I would like to know. There's a lot of things happening there, but just as a personal point of observation, the title of the song is Rock Lobster, not Red Lobster. And so,
well, I will say that this, between the title and these characters, this piece has set up super high expectations, and it's very easy to not meet those expectations.
Correct.
So, I mean, when you set that expectation so high, you have to follow through. So yeah, we're just don't set yourself too high.
Absolutely correct. But congratulations, author. Boy, you got into our heads with this one.
They're probably over there like, that's reaction. Not how I wanted in their heads.
Right. But yeah, absolutely. I'm impressed in every direction. My good friends, I have unfortunately a need to jump off the call at this time, off the stream at this time. I thank you all for tuning in. I thank you for being here and letting me be a part of this. I love being a part of these conversations. Brent, it was so good to meet you. I am handing this off to Becky, who is a superstar, who will be reading the entries. Can you read the entry and raise your hand at the same time, Becky? Are you?
I probably won't raise my hand because that would be distracting and probably kind of hurtful. But I will reserve comments for later. Yeah.
Excellent. I thank you all so much. It was good to see you all. Stay tuned for the rest of these stories and check us out online, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Alice.
Thanks, Aly.
Okay. So our next piece is a science fiction post-apocalyptic short story, and as Aly said, she sees these beforehand, but we don't, so I'm reading these cold, so please forgive me for any terrible pronunciations or stumblings. I will do my best. The title is Garden Earthly. Hank scooped a fistful of orange food paste from the communal trough and padded barefoot over to where the mother-of-pearl floor curved into a wall. Other humans were seated on the floor, naked and quietly eating their paste. No one looked around much. The novelty of the nakedness, of the prison walls of shell and everything else had worn off weeks ago. Even the impact of the sight of their shimmering, gelatinous captors, slug bodies flickering all over with hypnotizing lights, had gone stale in the gentle and comfortable monotony of life in the underground shell place. Hank did not know how long they'd been there. It didn't seem to matter much, but he knew it had been 7 meal periods since the beautiful human Ian had first begun to play with his food. Dark and sturdily built, Ian drew everyone's attention, sauntering down the length of the long shell food trough, pretending to peruse. After a moment, he nodded to himself in satisfaction, reached into the trough, and pulled out a scoop of the same paste as everyone else. Hank suppressed a smile as Ian padded over and sat directly beside him. He brought his own gentle citrusy paste to his mouth, watching Ian from the corner of his eye. Ian slapped paste onto his own bare thigh so loudly that Hank flinched. Then he set to shaping it into the shape of a flower. Hank watched the form bloom on the thigh right beside his mouth dry. Okay, I did not see any hands. I was trying to read and scan with my periphery. Let's start with Brent.
So I like the juxtaposition of the mundane and the weird. Like I like that that Hank is, you're describing things to me that are very uncomfortable. Like I'm not sure I would feel in a shell room full of naked people, and you're making it very mundane, and I like that because it establishes you're doing kind of like double work there. You're giving me good imagery, but you're also establishing a past history for me. So now I understand multiple things about Hank without you having to lay it out. Like I already know he's been there a long time because this is normal to him. And then you quickly give me someone who rebuts this system. And I like that because I was like, oh, wait, you made me used to the weird, and now you're making it weirder. And yeah, so I like the juxtaposition. I think you did a very good job here of establishing a lot without having to say a lot, because the language itself is very simple, which is fine. You know, it does what it needs to do, and you use this language to just really establish a lot. So I'm interested.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lesley?
I have a delivery coming, so Oz is barking. Becky, can you go?
Sure. I loved this. I loved other humans were seated on the floor because that establishes a weird vibe right away. I don't usually when I say other humans, I mean it disdainfully, and so I liked that the way that made me feel. I did feel that there was some repetitious language, we get shell a lot, and that doesn't do much for me after the first couple of repetitions. I want to know more about this shell. What do we mean by shell? Are these seashells? Is this specifically snail shells? Is it crafted in some way, or is it roughly hewn? I wanted a little bit more grounding in the visuals, but I am also a very world building loving reader, and I want to know lots of crunchy details about the world. There was one sentence near the end that I felt shaping it into the shape of a flower. That may be just a personal thing, but I stumble when words repeat like that because I wonder, is it my brain or did it actually say that? And so that will quite often throw me out of a piece. And so that's the kind of echo to look for, that maybe sometimes, reframing the language and choosing different words that vary it up a little bit. But overall, I really loved this, and I love how weird and it is, and I would definitely keep reading.
Yeah, I would also keep reading. I agree that you did it. The author did a fantastic job of taking things that are very mundane and making it taking weird things and making it very mundane, but also super weird. One of the things that I thought was very strong is I love the way where it says the beautiful human Ian had first begun to play with his food. And so immediately, because this is reading so weird, I'm play, is it getting up and I like that you're not sure if it's literal or figurative. Is the food playing back? Also because he's slapping it onto his thigh, and it into the shape of a flower. And then, you know, he's watching the form bloom on the thigh. And again, at this point in the story, we don't know, is it blooming because Ian is so great at forming it into a flower, it looks like a flower bloom, or is it literally blooming? And I really, really liked that. Like, it was just off kilter enough and just weird enough of a story where that didn't make me feel like you should be more specific. I was like, no, that was done very intentionally, and it's does a wonderful job of, like, at the end of each paragraph you're going, ooh, give me more of this weird shell prison story, which isn't a sentence I ever thought I would say. So yeah, I really, really thought that was very well done, because it was like, it, at least in the two places that we're seeing here, you ended a paragraph in a way that left me going, oh, is this literally happening? Or is this a figure of speech? And it made me want to keep going. So yeah, I thought that was very well done.
Yeah, I love all the concrete details to this. Like we've said, like, you know, getting the more crunchy and concrete and real the world is, the more we're going to be engrossed in it. It's good. Okay.
I just felt like the way that the details were laid out, because this is, again, in, like we've spoke about with other stories in this pile, you're putting us in a completely alien world. And this one in particular, I felt did a very good job of immediately kind of grounding us in this prison world. Like, I could see it.
Super creepy.
It is super creepy.
So this one says literary weird short story. The title is Peppo. I do not despise my father for dying, even if he is doing it at the wrong time. It is not winter. He tells me often that he will die in winter. It is too dry, he says, too cold. His coughing is always worse in winter. He cannot find enough blankets to keep himself warm in winter. It is not winter now. It is summer. I have eaten. I wait for my father to finish dinner so I can clean the dishes, because now his hands hurt too much for him to do it, even though I have dropped dishes before because they are too slippery. His medicine waits in a bowl. I counted them for him. I have been counting his medicine since I knew my numbers. He coughs after each swallow, and many times while there is still food in his mouth. The chewed stuff is spat all over the table, like a cloud of flies. He taught me it is not polite to eat with my mouth open or with my elbows on the table. I wait to remind him, because he never scolds me when I'm not feeling well, and now he is coughing a lot, so he must not be feeling well. He has to use his elbows to keep himself upright, using the table to brace his fork. When he coughs, the food drops off the fork anyway. Okay, so Leslie's hand went up right at the end, I think. So let's start with Lesley.
This is a very tedious perspective character. I noticed right away, I'm like, why aren't they using contractions? Part of me is like, okay, I could really get into this voice. I could really get into this character because it is different. It's not something we read a lot. But I do think that you need to be very careful, because this reads very tediously. It feels like mundane, like you're telling us every single small step, and we're not getting, other than we know from the very first sentence that his father's going to die, we're not getting what the plot is. Because somebody dying is just like one point in that plot. And so far, it's like we don't see anything of what is around that point, like what is happening beyond their eating. So I think this voice could be very interesting, but from what I'm reading here, I feel like it would be a slog to get through a whole short story. Like if there's 20 pages of this, I would not make it to the end, no matter how. I'm not invested enough in what's happening to put up with the tedious voice. So I feel like there is a reason for this voice. You need to make sure that your story holds enough impact and enough weight that your reader is going to be willing to stick with a voice that's going to get very exhausting reading long term. So that is why I raised my hand, because from what I'm seeing here, I can see that by 2 pages in, I would be very, very, if something's not grabbing my attention, that's demanding that you need to read to find out what's happening, I would just be like, I can't keep with this voice. So that's why I raised my hand.
Brent?
Yeah, Leslie's right on the money. Honestly, and I was very conflicted. I kind of wanted to raise my hand, but I was like, I know this is intentional, so I'm trying to like let it do something. I think what this story needs to do is what the previous one did well. It needs to shock the reader very quickly with a weird detail that is said mundanely, because then it becomes interesting, because like this person is obviously, they're used to this, and it's just very like droning on and on for them, and this isn't anything outside of their norm. So you have to throw a detail in there that, but then the problem is that we're used to these details. I mean, unfortunately, most of us have probably seen someone who's very like infirm later in life, and we've seen things like this. So what you need to do is shock us with a detail that's completely out of order. So like, I don't know, just for instance, if you said he will not die in winter, and then you just threw in some detail, gods of summer never die in winter, and then kept going. It's like, wait, he's a god? Like, wait, something interesting is like his medicine waits in the bowl. I have to dig through the bones to get to it. What bones? Like it needs some kind of detail that is just weird and out of place, that you still keep the same voice, but it's enough to shock me to be like, wait, that's very weird. What's happening here? And keep following it. So that would be my advice, is just find a way to bring the weird in very quickly, because that's what's going to keep the voice. You can't depend on the voice keeping our attention, because it's just not going to. It's very tedious. So you got to lean into the weird if you're going to carry us through today.
So I am going to be the odd person out here, because I really liked this, and I liked the voice, and I thought that the voice was giving me the weird that I was looking for in the other story that called itself weird, with these kind of run-on sentences, with the odd cadence of the structure, with the way that we get very short and then very long descriptions of things. I got a very strong emotional sense of like, not just tedium, but kind of like melancholy out of this, that I felt that the language was doing for me, like a cloud of flies, next to this idea of somebody in the grips of death and dying was a really powerful image for me. And because it said it was a literary weird, I was looking less for that immediate conflict that I'm looking for in more genre speculative stories. And I was kind of more interested in the character's emotional state and what situation was going on here. And so for me, I really enjoyed this, and not for Apex, because, you have to make sure that you're targeting your markets, well. But if I was reading for a literary magazine, I think that I would definitely have kept reading on this, because I liked it.
That is a very good point, though. Like, we're looking for the weird because it says right at the top of the submission, it's literary weird. But if we're reading this in a slush pile, I'll be very honest, and I don't know, Brent, maybe you're different. I don't read cover letters before I read a story. I don't.
Yeah.
If I at some point in the story am going, I feel like I'm missing something, I might go and search to see if that information that I feel like I'm missing is in the cover letter. But other than that, I'll be honest, I don't read cover letters after I've read the story. I don't read cover letters. So I would be going into this not knowing it's supposed to be literary weird, and reading for Apex, I would be like, okay, I need something. But yeah, that's a very good point, Becky. You do need to make sure that you're thinking about who your market is, and you also need to make sure that when you're writing a story, the genre is apparent without telling someone, because we don't put on the magazine. Now, people know Apex publishes dark speculative fiction, but we don't put weird or sci-fi or dark fantasy at the top of our stories. So if it's not clear, you could lose some readers who are kind of not sure what the expectations are.
Yeah, I definitely, the only time I touch cover letters if I'm looking for additional context, but then by that point I've already decided I probably can't do much with it unless everything else is just so exceptional that I can be like, okay, well, what's in your cover letter? We need to edit into the story, so I don't need the cover letter, because I think sometimes the cover letter can be a bit of a crutch in terms of like, you know, trying to get exposition. So I think sometimes people use the cover letter as exposition that they wish they could have put in the story. It's like, no, I need to be able to read it without having to touch that at all. So with this one, looking at it, I do see like there's a bit of like Poe-esque melancholy in it, and which is cool. I think it's just gotta do something to. I just really feel like it's gotta do something to justify the tedium of that voice for me.
And the big takeaway is authors don't panic over writing cover letters, because editors don't read them.
Yeah,
I don't. I literally don't look at them. I don't read them.
Yeah. Sorry,
I know that people worry about them and they put a lot of heart into like their bios and stuff. I don't look at them.
Yeah,
the story is what matters.
I think the only time, and this is a horror story more than a typical story, I think the only time I've ever looked at one was because we had an open call for Black writers, and I clearly knew this person wasn't Black, and I went back to the cover letter, and I was like, oh, lo and behold, no, they're not. So that's like a nuclear situation. That's not typical. So yeah, I wouldn't stress too much about cover letters. So
yeah, don't overthink them. Okay, so our next one is a neo-noir short story called Used Shadows. The stray intersection of County Road 34 and Bad Bear Pass is layered taut with stressed asphalt, the pressure relieved at irregular intervals by head-sized geysers spewing out filthy organic and bony sediment from prior collisions, curbside overdoses, and lazy murders. My mother and sister died here, victims of a gambler's sick fetish. Unlike the other dead ones, they do not come back. I wait anyway. A punctured do not enter sign bolsters a quartet of busted reflective barricades beyond the street signs, but this just teases the occasional death-worshipping thrill seeker. Despite the warning, they drive ahead anyway. Most finish as unexplainable accidents, their bodies smeared into chunks, grated guts and skins reconstituted into fallow human cheese before slipping below the thirsty ebony pitch. Today, the crossing is vigilant and quiet, hunter quiet. A sour downpour soaks the blacktop with slick rainbows that pool in oscillated pockmarks. Escaping crickets trail away towards safer meadow of tussock grass doused with splintered vials of opiate water, while overhead the sky is beaten by wings of fleeing birds. I am in the middle of this road, staring down a man 20 meters away. He is naked and pulsing, coalescing in a fusty steam. We are alone, save for a pair of lime Saucony running shoes lying abandoned in the mist. A familiar rusted crowbar appears at his forming ankles. He's a near copy of me, just like the others before, their core substrate a mix of the intersection's churning bowels and my imagination. Okay, I saw Brent's hand midway through, so I'm going to let him speak first.
Okay, so I tell writers this all the time with stuff. There's two kinds of world building. There's the horizontal and then there's the vertical. So with short stories, I think you are much better served if you take one or two world building elements and go deep with them, like just dive deep into them and really layer it. As opposed to with this one, I think the problem is that it was giving me 5 chapters worth of like world building concepts in 2 paragraphs, and I was like brain overloaded. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be getting out of this necessarily. So I personally, having heard the whole thing, those last 3 paragraphs, that's where your story starts. Like that's where the story starts. Everything before that was set up that really just confused me. Like if you start the story off with a naked man pulsating in steam, and there's another version of you in the like, that's action, that's plot, that's like questions. I'm wondering like, whoa, what is happening here? Yeah, so I just, well, overall recommendation I think with this is like, know what concepts you're actually trying to drive home and where you want the reader's interest to be, and just dive deep with those instead of trying to like give me like 7 different concepts to create an atmosphere, because I think that's probably what the intent was here, was to create an atmosphere of neo noir, but it was just too much too soon. So trust your reader to follow the breadcrumbs. You can lay out the breadcrumbs, we'll follow. Just have some faith in us. And yeah, I really truly think that story starts where that middle of the road sentence is.
I think that I would keep the opening paragraph. It is doing a lot of heavy lifting that I can hear Brent's argument, like, might need to be farther down, but I love noir and I love the gritty, dirty feel of it. And so I wanted some of that, knowing that it's noir. And I think that the fact that their mother and sister died there, and that they're not coming back, is important. And we probably for the story need that information up front. So I would leave that paragraph, maybe look at it. That first sentence is a full
massive.
3 line. It's a massive
massive
sentence.
Yeah.
So you might want to be like, can I like shrink it and tighten it just a bit? But those 2 paragraphs between that first paragraph and I'm in the middle of the road, personally, because I like gritty noir, I liked it. It is a lot of information that seems to kind of be spinning out in every single direction. I would take it because I like it. But you could totally cut those 2 paragraphs out, put that on in the middle of the road paragraph, get us to the story faster, and then put those details of your world that's spinning everywhere farther down in the story if you want to keep them. Because Brent's very right. Like, your story starts in the middle of the road staring down the man 20 meters away. I do feel like we need to know that the mother and sister died there, and that unlike the other dead ones, they're not going to come back. So I would leave that part. I would probably do a heavy edit, especially on that first line, just because that is long. Like, when you're getting 3 lines in one sentence, that's a lot of information right out of the gate. So either maybe break it up or kind of trim it and decide, what do we need up here? Because I think the important information is the mother and sister. Or maybe the mother and sister have nothing else to do with the story, and you could throw that paragraph out and it wouldn't change anything. But I enjoyed the writing style, but I enjoy a great noir. So I would just put those details, like, let your story start where it's supposed to start. You can throw those gritty details in later. All the juicy bits that the noir people are going to be like, yay, you can keep them, just put them farther down.
Yeah. I will say that as I was reading this, it kind of felt like one of those where it was like no noun left untouched. Like every noun had an adjective or two, and I was like, ugh, okay. And it's not that any of them were bad, because these are all great, powerful, like gritty images. Like Lesley said, these are great. But that first sentence is we have prior collisions, curbside overdoses, lazy murders, a gambler's sick fetish. And so it starts to be just kind of like word burble in my head, and I'm not like writing any of it down and getting grounded in this world. It just becomes like Brent was saying, it was just kind of overwhelming. And then I absolutely agree, when I got to I am in the middle of this road, in my head I was like, now the story is starting. This is where this is, really happening. And so I think that it's important when I'm writing, I'll quite often have an opening like this, because I'm putting the character into a situation, right? And then the story starts, because now I can see where the character is. And then when I go back, I cut all of that, and then I read it, and I only put back in what the reader absolutely needs from those big chunky paragraphs to understand the events and the actual story, right? So we can have these details like Lesley was saying, but splice them in only as absolutely necessary for the story to progress. I love the language here. This is great writing, but I think that it was a little bit overwhelming, and like they were saying, it starts a little bit slow. Sorry, go ahead, Lesley.
I almost wonder, like, as I'm thinking about it, because I'll be honest, I thought the story was going somewhere different, because those two paragraphs that we're talking about, like moving, it's talking about these people coming and purposely killing themselves in horrible accidents. And so in my mind, at first, that's where you set me up, that this is what this story is going to be about. But then it's like you switch and you're like, no, it's about these bodies that are coming back that are the main character. So I kind of am wondering if you have two stories here that you need to like pare down, tell one story, you can keep your world, and then you could tell another story and have two stories rather than trying to fuse them together, because it gets confusing to the reader if you try to put two stories. If you're not, it's a short story, it's not a novel. Like, obviously in a novel you need multiple storylines, but in a short story you really need to narrow in, like, what story am I telling? And it almost feels from this, we've got like two stories going on, possibly three, if the mother and sister don't have anything to do with this man that's coming back together in the middle of the road. That's like three stories in one world. Well, if you're not going to write a novel, give each of those storylines their own story. Keep your world, just copy and paste. Like, readers love if they love a world and they love a story set in that world, and then the author writes another story that's in that world. They already know that world. They love being able to revisit it in another story. So really, I just would wonder, do you have too many stories going on? That might be, if you really kind of narrow down on that, it might help a whole lot.
Okay, I've been given the signal that we have very little time left. So do you think we can get through one more? All right.
I promise to be brief.
So we're going to do one more. And if we didn't get to your piece, we're very sorry. And we think you're very brave for submitting for a critique like this. It's super scary to sit there and wonder if your story is going to come up. So good for you. This is a short science fiction story. It is titled Candidate 1143172, cover letter, Junior Pot Scrubber. I would be super great to work with. I'd never be late for work, and I'd always be smiling because I'd be so happy to be working on Interstellar Passenger Carrier 211 to Proxima Centauri b. This job would be my world. It'd for sure be better than the world we'd left behind. My tiny berth would be a million times better than my sleeping bag, which is rolled up and tucked behind a dumpster down the road. I'd forget all about it tucked back there, except that sometimes I'd hope someone else would have found it and maybe used it until they didn't need it anymore. After a year, or maybe a little more, I'd get myself one of those one-size-fits-most 12-setting shoulder massagers. Not that I'd show it off, or even need it, really, but I would lend it around to my colleagues who might be a little short that month, a little bit stressed. Maybe they'll have tight shoulders from carrying too many heavy pots, or will have spent too many credits on card games and late-night company. I'd offer to let anyone, and Lesley's hand is up. Brent's hand went up first, but I'm going to let Lesley go first because she hasn't raised her hand much today.
The short of it is, why do I care? Right? Because this is a job cover letter, and like Brent and I have already we've already said, we don't read the cover letters. So yeah, there is nothing here that is telling me what the plot of this story is. And if it is simply a cover letter explaining why this person, like, I do feel their need to try to get off of the world that they're on. Obviously, they're in a bad situation and they need to get anything. Being a pot scrubber on a spaceship is better than the situation that they're in. But there has to be more plot than that. And I really am afraid that there's not.
Yeah, for me, it's expectations. I think we're being not met. It says cover letter, so I'm expecting this to be very formal, very professional, very like, polished. It feels more like a diary entry. So I think what I would suggest here is think about why this story needs to exist as a cover letter, how you're going to convey plot through that cover letter, and how are you going to make it a story? Because that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to do something that is interesting. You're trying to do something interesting with formatting, and you can do that, but you still have to make sure the fundamentals are being met. So we still need a story. We still need a character. We still need to know what's happening. Why is this happening? So I would maybe suggest playing around with the format. Maybe you could do something like, I don't know, they do brackets where they do comments. Someone reviewing the letter is commenting on it, and they'll be like, doesn't meet qualifications, or it's like, or they'll comment on the candidate's name or something, just to create a sense of like there's a world behind this cover letter. So I think for me that was just the biggest issue. Like, the expectations of the cover letter weren't met, and then on top of that, I don't feel like there's necessarily a story so far that I can grasp onto.
Yeah. So I agree with, especially about the expectations that this is a cover letter, and then the voice is super informal. That being said, I love the idea of an epistolary type thing, and I love the stories where the story is actually happening off the page. And I love when a story does that well. And there's hints of that with, it's not much of a world anyway, this idea about the sleeping bag being left behind. But I think that it's a little bit too much focused on the voice and on the characters' events on the ship. And I don't get enough of the world that they're leaving behind or the context for that. And so for me, it just leaves me a little bit ungrounded again in the character. And I'm not sure which of these details, of which there are many, is the important plot bearing details and which are just window dressing, right? So I like the voice there, but it didn't quite come together for me. With that being said, I have been given the signal that we are nearly out of time. Thank you to everyone who submitted. Thank you to our judges, especially our special guest judge, Brent. And thank you to everyone who joined to watch this live stream, whether live or sometime in the nebulous future. I hope that our judges' comments were educational and helpful. If you enjoyed what you saw and heard here today, be sure to visit us online at apex-magazine.com and follow us on Twitter at @ApexMag. You can support us by becoming a backer on Patreon or subscribing via our website or waitlist books. I'm Rebecca Treasure. This is Lesley Conner and Brent Lambert. Thank you for joining us.